Nigel Farage is, of course, the host on GB News, Brexit leader and a free thinker who joins us exclusively here on Paul Murray Live each and every Tuesday night. Great man. We'll get to some protests that are taking place, similar to what we've seen here in Australia that have been happening in London. But I couldn't help but think, when I was watching the police taking this stand-back position, no fines being issued today, that when you wanted to come to Australia, the police pre-sent your promoters a bill of $20,000 to keep the rat bags away. How does that work? When somebody who hasn't even turned up gets a bill, but the people who actually do stuff out the front of the Opera House don't even get fined?
Yeah, I was astonished that the New South Wales police wanted protection money. Basically, it was a racket. Unless we paid the money, my meetings couldn't go ahead. And yet there was nobody that was coming to listen to me that had threatened violence in any way at all. No, the violence was all on the other side, and it shows you how twisted our thinking has become. And you know what you've seen said in Sydney and elsewhere in Australia over the last 48 hours, people coming out with slogans that are based on pure racial hatred. Let's be clear about this. This is outright racism against the Jewish people. The whole thing is extraordinary, and it exposes a double standard in not just the Australian police, it's not dissimilar here either, all based on this concept of white guilt. That's what it's all about.
Now, in London, what have you been seeing in terms of the same protest movement? And again, there are distinctions, and it is important for me to say these are not pro-Palestine rallies, these are pro-Hamas rallies, all right? Because if you're doing it right now, you're doing it in celebration about what Hamas did.
I have to say, Paul, I think we're all getting this wrong. We're talking about protests. These were not protests in London. They were celebrations.
Yeah.
People were out openly celebrating the fact that people have been kidnapped, raped, and murdered. These were celebrations of violence against innocent human beings. And in many ways, that makes the whole thing worse than protests. I have to say, last night at about 11 o'clock, I was in the back of a car going down a main London street, and there was a pro-Hamas demo. And I must be honest, we turned the car around and went in the other direction. I would have been very fearful for me going through that crowd, sitting in the back of a car and being recognised. I think the whole thing is utterly appalling. And here's the irony. I mean, if I was to say something on British television tonight that rightly or wrongly was misconstrued as in some way being Islamophobic, there'd be an absolute hue and cry. I'd be suspended as a TV presenter, hung out to dry by the left-wing media, and yet everyone turns a blind eye to racism against the Jews. And it just shows you how the hard left have got themselves into a very bad, very dangerous position, and why electorally they absolutely must be beaten all over the Western world.
Yeah, here is part of what was taking place at, as you say, those celebrations, not protests, in London. Have a look.
Lost in the ongoing conflict.
Palestine! Palestine! We will not be silent! We will not be silent!
For his part, Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, has echoed most of the world leaders by saying this.
The scenes that we've seen in Israel over the past 36 hours are truly horrifying. I want to express my absolute solidarity for the people of Israel. Now is not a time for equivocation, and I'm unequivocal. Hamas and the people who support Hamas are fully responsible for this appalling act of terror, for the murder of civilians and for the kidnapping of innocent people, including children. I've just spoken with Prime Minister Netanyahu to assure him of the UK's steadfast support as Israel defends itself against these appalling attacks. We will do everything that we can to help. Terrorism will not prevail.
As for his part, the US President is expected to make further remarks later today, but here's the latest from Joe Biden.
The United States stands with Israel. We will not ever fail to have their back. It's unconscionable. You know, when I spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu this morning, I told him the United States stands with the people of Israel in the face of these terrorist assaults. Israel has the right to defend itself and its people. Full stop. There's never justification for terrorist attacks. And my administration's support for Israel's security is rock solid and unwavering.
So take your pick here, Nigel. The failures in Ukraine, the failures in North Korea, the failures in Afghanistan, and now the failures in southern Israel.
I'm sorry, these words ring really hollow to me. Firstly, Rishi Sunak, the British government apparently is going to go on funding various Palestinian organisations despite what's happened in the last few days. But here's the worst thing. In August of this year, Joe Biden freed up $6 billion to the Iranian regime in exchange to get some prisoners back. Now look, or hostages really. Now look, Donald Trump on the 17th of August, just a few weeks ago, said Iran will use this $6 billion to fund terror groups and it will lead to conflict. And I tell you this, I don't believe any of this would have happened from Ukraine to what we saw on the Gaza-Israel borders the other day if Donald Trump had still been there in the White House. We are seeing our enemies all over the world feeding into weakness. And, you know, I'm not pretending Trump is a perfect human being, but goodness me, on the world stage, he was respected and feared by bad regimes.
Yep, bloody oath. Thank you, mate. Do appreciate it. I'm sure that the great man will have plenty to say between now and then, and our great man will join us again next Tuesday.